So I'd like to thank you all for being here today, and I'd particularly like to say thank you to the panel. Today is really going to work as a discussion, and there are some things we're going to be talking about in our own work and references to data sources that we will send out with appropriate links after we've talked today. But I'd really like to start by talking to Simone. As I said, I've known Simone for a long time. I've known her for over 10 years. I met her when I was doing my PhD, don't laugh. And our paths have continued to cross because we're both demographers and we've both been working in the local government space in our various roles dealing with local government data, yes. And which is always fun. And we always meet and we get excited about the projects that we're doing. We talk about the new data that we get excited about. You wouldn't believe how excited we were when internal migration estimates were finally released by the ABS and we could use them. And then we get frustrated about what data isn't available and what we can't do. So currently it's about the new quarterly migration estimates only being released for capital cities and not any smaller areas. But really, I know for me, one of the things that really excites me about population and local government is really seeing those macro level population changes that I know about as a demographer playing out at a community level. So Simone, I'm interested in hearing from you too, having worked across all tiers of government and in private practice, why is population data important at the local government level?
Yeah, look, thanks, Kim. Yes, I have worked at all three levels of government, and having worked at local government in Western Melbourne, I can confirm that it is a level of government where you are very close to the community. So the decisions that you make and the strategies you develop definitely have an impact on the communities. I guess one of the main things I saw, because I worked at Hobson's Bay Council for a couple of years, and it is a council where it's very different across councils. So getting population data at that sort of suburb or neighbourhood level is critical to understanding and planning for the communities. Yeah, I guess that's one of the main insights I've gathered, and you know, Simon and Sarah will probably concur. Kim, you're on mute.
I put myself on mute because we have some unexpected works taking place at my office today. So if you hear loud, you know, banging and drills, it's me. So then, Simone, it would be interested if you could also talk a bit more about why do we need to look at local government differently? Like, why do we, you know, what is it that we need to understand differently for local governments than, say, state government or federal government?
Yeah, look, I think, you know, it really comes down to how populations are changing at a local level, you know, as I was sort of alluding to before, and planning for services, because, you know, even within council or a council area, you know, the population trends can be quite significantly different across, you know, area. I always use Hobson's Bay as an example because the eastern side is very different to the western side, but even a fast growing council like Wyndham, Melbourne's western outskirts, often records one of the highest growth rates in the country. There actually are parts of Wyndham that are actually very stable in population or declining. Their age structures are different. They have different service demands, and there's kind of sorts of things that we need to know about. So, well, local government needs to know about so they can plan appropriately.
I think that's absolutely right, that just being able to, you can't necessarily just see what's happening at a state level or even, you know, a big area like the capital city and have an understanding of the nuances that are happening across there. So Simon and Sarah, really I'd like to turn to you now because you're seeing this, you know, at the grassroots level. So I'm interested in, you know, why do we need to look at data differently at local government compared to other areas that we might be looking at, and what is the data that you use when trying to understand what's happening at that local level? So Simon, I might go to you first.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's great to be part of this panel discussion. I might just start by extending my acknowledgement as well that I'm coming today from the traditional lands of the Awabakal and Worimi peoples, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who've joined this discussion today. I thought I'd answer this question by sort of painting a picture of a story of change that's happening in Newcastle at the moment. As Kim said in the intro there, and for those who are unaware, Newcastle's a large regional city. We often describe ourselves as a gateway city and recognise that that tier just below capital city size and the value that we can provide to economic opportunities across the country. Newcastle's had quite significant change over the past decade, and the real catalyst for change in the CBD has been the removal of our heavy rail corridor, which provided a connection that didn't previously exist between the existing CBD and the heritage buildings and the waterfront. It's really led to a boom in private sector investment and development across this corridor. And so in terms of data and story and understanding what the local population impact is for this area, it's a challenge for us. We obviously, like many other local councils and probably everyone on this call, uses the range of ABS, private sector and also state and federal government data sources that are available. But this situation for us is really unique. And so we've got two major developers who've purchased large patches of lands throughout the Newcastle CBD. And in conversation with them, and this is one of our key data sources, is we understand we're about 4,000 additional apartments that are going to be built and coming online over the next 5 years in Newcastle. And that's in the CBD corridor, so about within 2 kilometres of Newcastle Beach. So then the challenge for us is to understand who's going to be living in these apartments, and therefore what does the impact, understanding the who really impacts what our suite of programs and services that we can provide at a local government level. It's really difficult to understand that question of who. So we have information from the developers about age profiles of people who've bought that. Question then, is it an investment property? Is it an owner-occupier property? What does the impact of that look like? And then to throw into the mix is a decision that happens maybe about 8 years ago as well, as the University of Newcastle made a significant decision to relocate sections of their campus into the CBD as well. And so how does that change the demographic profile of the CBD? I've asked a lot of questions. I'll spin around to some answers as we go through this panel discussion as well. But these are some of the challenges that we're thinking about at a local government level, and the traditional data sources don't serve that purpose for us. That's where partnerships with these private sector developers, real estate agents, and even recruiters, and we can talk about some of the changes we've seen since COVID as well, can really paint some of that localized story for us. But I might hand over to Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah, I saw you nodding a lot, so.
Yeah, very similar issues. But first, I also wanted to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am speaking to you today, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and anybody here today as well who might identify as Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander. Very similar issues, Simon. There's nothing that you raised there completely shocked me, unfortunately. For those who are not familiar with the city of Casey as well, where we hold the largest population in Victoria, in our municipality, and we're very fast growing. So I think for the last, I don't even know how many years it's been that long, we've consistently been the largest, we've been adding the largest number of people every year, except for last year where Wyndham overtook us for the largest number of growth. But that just goes to show that how quickly things are changing at the local level. And for us, especially in our growth areas, you know, we've got PSPs, many PSPs that are growing. And the story constantly is that we have this 20-year development that 5 years in, it's more than 50% of the way. And so that rapid change, of course, is adding more pressure on our services, on our infrastructure, and it's making it difficult to actually do long-term planning when what's happening on the ground is very different and it's not showing through the data quick enough. Of course, Census is every 5 years. And so, I mean, even for things like our council plan or just the changing service needs, the data's not coming to us quick enough. So we might have services and programs on the ground that are just not responding to the needs of these new communities. So like you, Simon, we're trying to turn to developers as well to give us some of the information. We're trying to use the local data that we have through our subdivision teams, you know, how many lots are getting on the ground, how many certificate of occupancies, bin requests, and then trying to find creative ways through research. And we've currently actually got a research project on the way in Clyde North in one of our new communities in Orana, where we're trying to get in early and ask the future residents, perhaps when they think they'll move in, what services they might expect or what services they think they will need in however many years time, to help us kind of paint a picture of who's moving in before the census, because at the end of the day, every 5 years things change so rapidly.
Sarah, I wonder if I could ask just a question on that in terms of what the age profiles look like of that growth over the recent years as well. Is there a consistent younger age demographic, family formation age profile, and expectations of whether that would continue? And just really quickly for context for us in that CBD corridor is an understanding that a lot of the apartments have been bought by elderly residents, people who are looking at a downsizing opportunity in Newcastle. And at the same time, we have a new university coming into the CBD as well. Are these investment places? Are they owner occupiers? So this is a challenge we're grappling with, because that age profile really has a significant impact on what it looks like for local government.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. For us, we are seeing a little bit of that older kind of downsizer group, but it's predominantly young families moving in either from other parts of Victoria or directly from overseas, that kind of the first home builders, the first kind of family making demographic. Moving into our growth area is kind of the Australian dream idea. That's what we're seeing on the ground. So I think for us, that the challenge is keeping up with those, early years services in particular.
Yeah.
And also we're seeing a lot of single parent households coming out. I guess it's kind of our growth areas are marketed as more affordable in some ways, and single family homes. So we don't really have many apartments, or sort of what you might have, Simon, in Newcastle. But we're sort of shifting now towards that medium density dwelling. So we've got a lot of couples as well that are moving in, starting their families and then moving on. So it's quite the diversity is the challenging part for us.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because even in Victoria, where you've got government policy, your state government policies such as the introduction of 3-year-old kinder, which then completely, changed the need for looking at, 3 and 4-year-olds for planning, where the location of kindergartens and so forth, sort of other community infrastructure. Those sort of policy changes, I guess, need to be considered at local government level, and then it obviously comes back to where the data is available. And this is obviously things where small area forecasting, population forecasting can assist too.
Yeah, absolutely. And even on that 3-year-old kindergarten and the kindergarten infrastructure and service plans that we've got coming up now, COVID's just thrown another spanner in the works. I think I'm jumping ahead here, but what is our current population? What is the impact? How can we plan for the next 10 years? When we have this uncertainty around our current population, let alone the growth in the early years or the lack of growth.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Kim, you're on mute, I believe.
Look, I'm trying to protect you from our work people. Look, I think one of the things that really has come through, a couple of things, whenever I talk about population, I keep saying people have to be talking about age. It's age, because everything is affected by it. And as Simon and Sarah have just talked about, it's a critical part of this planning process. But what's also come through from what you've talked about is just trying to keep pace with the change and needing to look at alternative sources of information. We've just had a comment put in the chat that even 30 years ago, we used garbage bin requests, and certainly Simone and I were talking about this just the last couple of days about councils are using, rubbish bins as the indicator of how growth might be happening. But it's a bit different. Some of my experience in regional New South Wales has been where there is change happening in different ways. It's not about growth, it's about changing composition and how to actually keep track of a temporary workforce that is coming in to work on special activation precinct projects or mining workforces. And so certainly have explored using things like water usage data. In a drought, that's not very reliable. You know, Rex arrivals, when airlines go, you know, don't go as much because of COVID, again, you lose that ability. But it really is trying to be a little bit innovative in thinking about how do you actually measure what is happening now and keep pace with some of those changes. I'm going to kind of wanting to talk about, we've talked a little bit about the timing of the data, but are there other data gaps that you really come across in relation to population when you're doing the work that you need to do at a local government level? Simon?
For sure, there's always data gaps, and there's always opportunities for new data sources to fill that as well. I think the most relevant story here is the impact of COVID and the impact of COVID on migration patterns across Australia. And recognise the Centre for Population and new ABS data has come out recently that unpacks a little bit of that story. There's a lot more of that story that still needs to be unpacked. And obviously for us in Newcastle and other regional gateway cities and regional centres across Australia, understanding the specifics of that trend is going to be really important for our decision making moving forward as well. To talk through that, we obviously mentioned already the internal migration data is currently capital city and rest of state, the latest piece of data that we have. But to talk about some alternatives and some of the stories that we've seen, and I talked about that a little bit before, but we're at a rental vacancy of just above 0%. So my understanding is there's a 0.3% in Newcastle LGA. So in terms of where that was a year ago, which was well over 1%, is a significant change. And obviously migration is part of that story as well. We're very much thinking about how we can, and I'll talk to some of the programs where we've been implementing as well, but how we promote and accentuate this trend for Newcastle and recognise the opportunities that this presents for our city as well. Another interesting piece is we work quite closely with a recruitment agency as well, who provides data on just number of inquiries per job ad that they've had, and that's between 2 and 2.5% higher currently than what it was previously. Obviously, there's a number of factors that are driving that, both the economic impacts and the jobless rate that exists in Newcastle and across the country, but also migration and considering alternative options from capital cities may be part of that story as well. So that's some of the data sources that we're considering in this sort of post-COVID impacts on migration.
And so, Simone, I wondered if there were any other particular data gaps that you would be able to talk about.
Look, because we work with councils at REMPLAN, obviously, we see some of these issues being raised as well. One thing that's intrigued me lately has been a couple of councils have asked me about birth rates and, the classic thing about what will happen with birth rates in this COVID era. Interestingly, some of the data that's coming out of the ABS suggests in Victoria anyway that the number of births are declining, which is really interesting because the councils are contacting me because their MCH registrations are suggesting that's going the other way. So, and I can see Sarah nodding her head as well. So that's the kind of thing, I guess, where, councils can look internally to their own systems to see what data they have. Admin data is always fraught with issues, but as with anything, you just need to consider, its cleanliness and whether it's fit for purpose and so forth, because it can fill some of those gaps in at a local level. And particularly, in my experience, I've used some of that. Jan Balding mentioned the bins data in the chat, and yes, I've used that in the past in the absence of, decent building permit data to try and determine where growth is happening within a council area as well. So yes, there's lots of things, and sometimes it's just a matter of just asking around council just to see what's available.
Yeah, Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Sarah, go ahead.
Just off the back of that, I mean, our on the ground knowledge and what we're hearing through our internal departments is actually growth hasn't slowed down, but we're getting this message from this at a state level saying, actually, you know, we're expecting this decline and it's going to be impacting our growth areas and yada, 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 but we still haven't seen that impact yet. Yeah, so there's almost a disconnect between, you know, I guess the modelling and what's actually happening on the ground. And without that real time, I shouldn't say real time, that's quite idealistic, but without, I guess, more, I guess, local level data to reflect that, you know, how do you balance?
Yeah, look, I think that's a critical point, you know, for the small area forecast, you know, like, you know, REMPLAN, as I was saying, we do population forecast, we update ours annually and we always have. And I think that's become more critical because, you know, trends are shifting and we just, you know, those sorts of things obviously need to be considered in terms of population assumptions. So I guess, yeah, keep taking into consideration that those local trends to ensure that you get an, you know, as accurate as possible forecast at local level so it can be used for planning and so forth.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has really come through, throughout that COVID has really highlighted is that we do live with uncertainty. And, you know, COVID is an extreme level of uncertainty in terms of population, but we've always had that in terms of what migration levels might be. Fertility rates have always fluctuated, you know, life expectancy does change. And what one of the things that we've really been working with people is making sure we look at what the assumptions are that are informing decision making so that you can actually start to respond that when your assumption about migration, for example, there's a net migration loss all of a sudden when you've been assuming growth, that you can then start to go, well, what is the impact of that? And some of the places in regional New South Wales where we work, where there's not much change, it's really about trying to monitor quite small changes because that has really big impacts on age profiles in the short and longer term. And so it's when does that assumption change? So you need to pull the trigger on another planning decision. It's a really important part of what's happening going forward.
Just to add to that, Kim, as well, just thinking about assumptions that have changed is the change in the rental vacancy in Newcastle really adds housing as another constraint to population change moving forward in Newcastle, which may not have had the same extent previously, and it brings that constraint that is often applied in population projections in the capital cities, particularly Sydney and Melbourne, as just as applicable in Newcastle moving forward as well.
Yep, I think that's,
Sorry, Sarah? I was just going to add before we move on, just a key point that I really wanted to highlight as a data gap, and that's the lack of intersectional data. So it's fantastic, you know, we can be talking about population data, wonderful, but what does that look like broken down? So, for example, if we're looking at our most recent health and wellbeing plans, we're really struggling to find data that crosses over, you know, gender, socioeconomic status, LGBTIQ, those different intersections that might actually impact people's experiences. So it's not just about the population and growth, it's also what about the people? Who are these people that we're planning for? And just advocating, like, we really need to get better at that local level intersectional data.
So you must be very excited about the upcoming census, Sarah.
You bet. Simone and I were actually talking about this not long ago.
Well, I was just going to say, look, another element of that is also, of course, the, you know, birthplace and language data that comes out of the census. And really, again, something that I learned when I was in local government was, you know, just working with communities and, you know, just getting updated data on numbers and new, especially emerging communities and where they're located. During COVID, you know, became really obvious that some new in emerging communities were not getting the messages around social distancing and so forth. So a lot of effort then went into identifying where these groups were. But of course, you end up going back to 2016 census data because there's really not a lot else. You know, I know that the ABS does release sort of updated data on birthplace numbers, you know, they did some release some data very recently, but of course that's just at the Australia level. And it is useful because you can, at that level, but really for planning on the ground, yeah, it's not great, I guess. Yeah.
So it's this challenge between having data that comes out of the census, which is invaluable. Like it is the data source that I go back to again and again, because you can get that disaggregation of who people are. And there are some things that are really stable over time from census to census, but then picking up those things that are a bit different. I'd just like to move on a little bit from data now, if I may, and really think about, so how might our understanding of population and demography at a local level help us inform strategy development? And I'm really interested, Simon, in hearing about your recent experiences in Newcastle in doing this.
Oh, it's excellent timing as well, Kim, and very keen to talk about the sort of the application of demography in our economic programs as well. Last night at our council meeting, they unanimously supported our new economic development strategy, which I think anyone who's been involved in local government knows that's not a common occurrence for a unanimous decision. But I think it's an excellent outcome, and it was a real shift from us internally about how we shaped our economic programs to be underpinned by what the population looks like in Newcastle, and actually genuinely call out some of the challenges that our population has, and in particular the skills base of our population, and how we can, as a council, provide leadership and nudge opportunities moving forward. And so Newcastle's population has been growing at a moderate pace for a number of years, and Newcastle LGA is one of a collection of 5 LGAs that represent the greater Newcastle area. Also, as a reflection of the industries that have been predominant in Newcastle, lacks diversity and lacks that percentage of people who've been born overseas or international migrants, and noting that a lot of them arrive in Australia on skilled migration visas is a proxy for what the skills base looks like in the city as well. And there's also a lower proportion of post-school qualifications in a number of other areas across the country as well. And so we recognise these challenges and have created a number of programs that seek to respond to these demographic challenges. And we know local government has a remit in this space, and we can nudge in the right direction. We know it's not going to be transformative for the whole population, and that's a combination of private sector, tertiary institutions, and ourselves, plus state government and federal government support to enable that to happen. But some of the really interesting economic programs that we've been put in place recently, there's a skills program where we're enabling local businesses to partner with local institutions to deliver really targeted training, but also mentoring in a range of different skills that were identified as missing in our local government area. But the really exciting one is our New Move program. So I might even share the link in the chat in a minute, but it's a campaign that we built off a concept that was built in the US called Remote Tulsa. For those who don't know, Tulsa's an oil city in the middle of Oklahoma, and they ran this campaign with a $10,000 relocation grant to incentivize people to consider remote working from Tulsa and then contribute to their local network by being based out of the city in Tulsa. Hugely successful, hundreds of millions of social media engagements, thousands of applications, hundreds of people moved to the city, and it's really been transformative for Tulsa. And so we've just recently replicated a similar initiative in Newcastle, where we've accentuating the migration trends that are already happening, is to encourage people from other capital cities and also internationally to consider Newcastle as an alternative location to bring their talent, to bring their skills, to bring their ideas, to then create and expand their opportunity from our city. We also had millions of views via social media, over 500 applications, and we'll be selecting 30 people who receive a relocation grant to come to Newcastle. That money has to be spent within the LGA as an investment set up for their business or their operation that they're going to run from Newcastle. And really see it as an exciting program and a frame that shows what the future population of Newcastle could look like, and a real a leadership and an image piece that the City of Newcastle's trying to put out. It's a really interesting program, and it sort of has that underpinning on understanding what the demography is in the city and trying to respond to that in a practical way.
Look, it's really, I keep saying demographers are the centre of the universe because we know what's happening with population, and so it's really exciting to see population embedded in a strategic plan and strategic decision making in that way. Sarah, I don't know if you've got some examples in terms of how understanding populations informing your strategic planning at Casey.
Absolutely. I guess so in the current area that I work in, and I'm sure many councils have already started working on this as well, if not already completed, but our community services and infrastructure plan is a long-term 10-year, well, hopefully 10-year plan that will I guess outline the community services and infrastructure that will be required across the city. Now, the idea is that this is going to be, I guess, fluid as the population changes, as the breakdown changes. We're able to update those, I guess, forecasts and the modelling to give us a bit of an indication of where we're headed and how we're changing in the long term. And so we'll be feeding in a lot of not only demographic data, but those business insights that we create from other strategic works that's going on. So we're currently doing 5 big strategies that look across infrastructure, environment, health and wellbeing, and all of those insights we're hoping to pull into this model that we're trying to keep as fluid as possible. Because in the past, we haven't been able to do that long-term planning because of the lack of insights and the lack of data that we just don't have centralised. So I guess that's one example from our end at the moment.
You know, it's really exciting to hear. One of the things I found before I, became a demographer again, I spent 15 to 20 years working on strategic policy at state levels, and really using that population framework always meant that you developed priorities and policies that actually responded to the need. And even while we're talking about change, populations are relatively stable. Once people are here, they tend to be here next year. We know they're going to start school at 5. They're probably going to be out partying by 20. So, they're going to be wanting jobs by 20 to 25. And so we can, within this state of uncertainty, there are actually some things that we do know will happen, and we absolutely can plan now for quite a long time into the future with some degree of certainty. I'm just wondering if anybody has any questions. I'm going to open it up to questions for anybody on our panel.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Kim, but maybe while those questions are coming through, I also just wanted to sort of reflect on, you talked about how we're seeking to use demographic data and information to inform policy and plans and strategies at a local government level. We're also trying to ourselves start thinking about how can we convey that information to our community, and particularly to our local businesses as well, to help and inform them to make insightful decisions in terms of their operations as well. And one project, and this is very early days for us, is we're thinking about Newcastle has a range of smart city infrastructure that's been embedded as part of our revitalisation, which is really exciting in terms of what data we can capture in terms of population movements, environmental trends, transport movements across the city, and then combining that with some of the banking transaction data, for instance, is how could we bring this information together and package it together in a way for local business that helps them understand who their potential customers are, who's moving around the city, how they're moving around the city, to help them make better decisions as well. So that's sort of the thinking for us, that the application and practical components we're still working through, but I think that's a really exciting space that this demographic knowledge can push into as well at a local government level.
I think that's a really interesting point, Simon. I think it comes back to sometimes, what is a population? Because there's all different types, of course. You've just got you've got your ERP, you've got your usual residence population, from the census, sorry, but also, the working population from the census data just tends to get very underutilised as well. And it's also just obviously a good indication of the daytime population. But all those things you mentioned that, coming sort of, I guess, sort of these newer technologies that can, measure activity in a main street, and things like that in terms of helping businesses plan, especially things like COVID recovery and things like that. Obviously needs a level of investment, and it's not always available to all local governments. But yes, the potential is there, and just a lot of other data sources that are yet to be exploited in the future. Watch this space kind of thing, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, particularly during these times of uncertainty, is how do you package up the change, but also how do you convey the level of uncertainty and just what that impact might be. At a state level, that can be like huge. We can be talking hundreds of thousands of difference of people in the next 10 years. At a local level, those numbers might be smaller depending on the size of the community. Really, once you start talking about scenarios, it's about how does that impact age structure. That tends to be the thing that I see people really need to be understanding, is not just that size, but because sometimes you can have very little change on size, but you see acceleration of population ageing, for example. So I've just seen a question come through. So it's from Rebecca Santos. Who or what area in the organisation drives the conversation about demographics internally? Are there ongoing conversations around this data to educate employees in order to add value? So Simon and Sarah, you can start that, and then probably Simone and I've got some observations too from having worked with people. Simon, you're not on mute, so you can go first.
Thanks, Kim, and thanks for the question, Rebecca. I think it's a really important conversation to be had right across most sectors and areas within council. I think a reflection would be, and I think it's representative of Sarah and my roles, is that the conversation's typically led from a social planning space, and obviously I've brought it in from an economic development space here today. Really important discussion to be had from an urban planning space as well, of course. And then the size and scale of local governments, just like most bureaucracies, ensuring consistency, the use of the same data is a challenge, but also really important to navigate as well.
Thanks, Simon. Sarah?
Yeah, I echo what Simon said as well. Social planning from our end definitely drive those conversations. And more recently, we've been tapping into the expertise in our business intelligence department as well, and recognising the technical skills that they bring that can really help us actually amp up this internal and kind of population data that we have, to use it more effectively across the organisation. So then you've got, I guess, two areas of council kind of working together to push out the same message, and I think that can be really effective.
Simone, do you want to make a comment on this question? Who drives this conversation on population?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting question. And look, I agree with what Simon and Sarah have said. In my experience, look, having worked with lots of councils across Australia, they're all structured differently. Some don't even have a social planner, and then it might come from strategic planning. Sometimes it's from economic development. Some councils are very small and they don't even have these positions. And then, it could even come down to the CEO. It's really, really diverse. But they're important, conversations to have. I've always, in our roles, Kim, we always try to help councils understand how they're changing and why. So sometimes it can even be an external influence bringing in that sort of information.
Yeah, look, I think my experience is outside of the structures about where you might sit population, having somebody who understands population is really important, so that there's an internal champion. You know, I would argue that there needs to be a demographer in all councils, because the demographer really understands what is happening and how, and it can affect all parts of what we're doing. Often what we see with population is we get some demographics. We get, you know, a strategy might have a page that says size of the population and so forth, and then it's never referred to again. And so having an internal champion helps, and also having people who can make that have that impact and talk about. So why do you need to understand, you know, what your age profile is? How does it influence economic planning, as Simon has been talking about? How does it impact, you know, how land use planning for housing that meets that age profile, as so forth? And Jan has just said share, share, share. Yes, absolutely. You know, it's one of the reasons we, Simone and I talked about having this seminar, was about the need to be talking about these issues at a local government level and talking about the impact. I've got a follow-up question from John Hudson to the previous question. Aren't demographic and other data part of the reporting that local governments use for reporting? Like, so do you report on population against strategic plans, Simon?
Yep. So I agree with John's comment there. It is definitely part of the reporting cycle. I think reflecting on your comment there as well, Kim, is the real importance of taking it away from a reporting mechanism, a stopgap within a report, to this is the demographics page, to genuine analysis that informs program development, informs decision making, and it's definitely something we're advocating for and trying to implement in our team at the City of Newcastle. And I think it's really important that that's replicated across the board as well.
Sarah?
Once again, yeah, echoing
Yep.
Simon's comments. I mean, not much more to add there. You said that perfectly. Yeah, there needs to be more emphasis on what's happening with the population, and we need to be held accountable to make sure that we're actually responding to who our community are and what their needs are.
Yeah, excellent. So I was just reading through the end of Jan Fording's comment about that, you know, we need to educate each other as well. So certainly if there is knowledge, then that needs to be part of it. And the comment here about in New South Wales, the local strategic planning statements set the demographic context, absolutely. It's part of the, also part of the integrated reporting frameworks, that part of the New South Wales requirements across local government, and it is about embedding it, because population drives every decision. It's population. It's either population growth or no growth or even decline that really then informs a whole lot of decision making. So we're coming to the end of our hour, and so there's still a chance to put more questions into the chat if you have any further questions for people. But I'm going to ask everyone on the panel 2 questions. In an ideal world, what data would you have that you don't have now? And a second question is, if you could give other people working in local government one piece of advice, what would it be? So I'm going to start with that first question. If you could have one piece of data, well, a range of data that you don't have now, what would it be? Simon?
Oh, I keep having to go first.
Well, I can, it's because you take yourself off mute. You're too eager.
I think for us, it'd be genuinely understanding the impacts of COVID on migration trends to Newcastle, and unpacking who these people are that are arriving, and therefore thinking about what the implications of that would be for future projections on migration trends. That's a multitude of data sources. I think it's pinpointing one is difficult. Obviously, the ABS internal migration estimates are part of that suite, but having a way of being able to tell that story effectively would be really valuable for us and our programming.
Excellent, thank you. Sarah?
In addition to Simon's wish list, which we would all absolutely love, for me, I'm going to steer a little bit away here and just say consistent data over time, please. Consistent data, same methodologies, don't change the questions on us, then we can't compare time series data. And having it shared between government departments as well. Data sharing is so important for us as well. Being able to access things that I guess the state government can access without throwing anyone under the bus there. And yeah, having it all available in CSV so we can run our analysis and do things with it that don't just rely on what's produced.
Yeah, here to open data, big supporter of that. Simone, if you could have, what data would you have that you don't have now? Try to narrow it down.
This is where I always make the joke about everyone being microchipped at birth so we can find everything out all timely and everything. But of course, that's, a science fiction film. But I think, look, it's not really that dissimilar to what Simon and Sarah have said. I would actually like to see something a little bit different. I'd actually like to see the ABS be a bit more open about and transparent about some of the decisions they make in terms of census processing and not sort of suddenly giving us a big shock when the data is released. An example is what they did with the randomisation techniques last census. It's like, oh, here it is, and here's what we've done. And I mean, yes, there's reasons why they do it, but I would like a little bit of forewarning would be nice. So it's kind of like a slightly different angle to what the other two have said, but yeah, definitely concur with what they've said.
But really relevant. Well, and yeah, I think I would really love to see some of our existing data sets at a small scale. So, I get frustrated with the employment data because people want to know about jobs. I get frustrated with the migration estimates that have come out with COVID with the large age groups. I know there are reasons that the ABS do that, but it really would make conversations much easier to be able to support strategic decision making. People are making decisions now about infrastructure for the next 10 and 20 years, and the data isn't available often to be able to make those. So I would second that as well. So
just to add to your employment data as well, Kim, to give the example in Newcastle, is the labour force survey data indicates that Newcastle and the Hunter region's been the most significantly impacted region in New South Wales by COVID and the downturn in economic activity. And the payroll data indicates that Newcastle is the second least impacted by the economic downturn due to COVID, and therefore recognise they're different sources of data and telling slightly different, picking up slightly different pieces of information, but the narratives are quite diverse, which is really difficult to report on. But in terms of responses in an economic program, the overall message of unemployment increasing quite significantly was still quite easy to communicate.
Yeah, thanks for that, Simon. Yeah.
I was just going to add, look, we sound like we're bagging the ABS, but really, to be fair, they have actually had some really innovative things come out. Like, I love how they've got now the components of change in the ERPs, because it just gives that added dimension to explain the how populations are changing rather than just by how much. So I do think that's really good. So
yeah, look, I think it's always the case. You get something and then you just want more. Like, if you ask people what they want, they will ask for more. But certainly the internal migration estimates are now part of my toolkit. But, what do you do when they tell a different story to census migration data, for example? You then have to make a call on that. So I've got 5 minutes to go. And we have just had a question about lobbying to the ABS, and that does happen from state governments and from, people who work in the demography space. It's ongoing. Again, ABS makes, they have to work within their budgets and prioritise actions as well. And but that might be a different topic. I'm going to close then with, if you could give one piece of advice to people working with population at local government level, what would that be, Simone?
I relate to what I just said. Look, just don't focus too much on the number, because I often find that people seem to think that, oh, if it's increased, it's great, but if it's gone backwards, not so great. But it's really more about the drivers behind that, because really planning for growth and planning for declining populations they're both very challenging. So it's really about understanding why the population's changing. That's I guess the advice I would give.
Thanks, Simone, and that's just what we've got from Dan in the comments as well. Sarah, what would your one piece of advice be?
My advice actually would be not too dissimilar to what Jan was saying earlier about sharing. Share, share, share. Don't reinvent the wheel. Between us, there's plenty to go around, I think.
Excellent. And Simon, your one piece of advice?
Yeah, I think I'll just pick up on what Simone was saying in terms of communicating as a narrative and as a story in a way that that can resonate with the community, so that they can understand what that change is as well. I think there's sometimes we can be too data heavy and sort of get caught in the details without seeing the more macro story. That's the important communication piece, which for local government's a really valuable piece of what we do.
Thank you, Simon. I think you've all echoed what my one piece of advice would be to whenever I'm talking with local government, it really is about making sure people understand what the age profile is within the areas that they're working in, because even without forecasts, without even thinking about it, you know a lot about what's going to happen in the next 5 and 10 years just by having a really good understanding of who is in a place now, what their age is and what their characteristics are. And you'll also then have a good understanding of what's going to drive change into the future. And sometimes people talk about really big increases in population or declines. And when you look at the age profile and what might be driving it, it's like, well, actually, let's just think logically through the people who are here now and what might happen. And you can come to a different story, which really links to that macro view that Simon was talking about and just how important that is. Look, we've got a couple of minutes until 1:30, so if there's any burning questions. Otherwise, I'm going to say thank you very, very much to my panelists, to Simon, to Sarah, and to Simone, and to my work colleagues at Astrolabe, who've really helped make sure that everything behind the scenes is working well on this Zoom call. Look, Simone and I said that an hour wouldn't be long enough, because usually we sit down and talk, and about 4 hours go by and we're still talking population. So I think we've been very restrained today, and I'd like to thank you all for logging in. When you registered, everyone talked about what they'd like to hear about today, and it's really shown that there's a lot of interest in a whole range of different topics, and so we will be talking about what we can do through the Australian Population Association and with everyone interested in demography about what we can talk about further, because there's obviously a real need to understand what's happening at a local government level and really how to apply what we know so that we can inform that strategic decision making and in the end make lives better for the people who are living in the places that we love. So thank you once again, and I wish you